There are so many amazing sonnets, and it wouldn't do to just make one video introducing sonnets and not look at what the great poets have done with the things since Petrarch and Shakespeare. This video is about more sonnets. What follows are some of my favorite sonnets other than Shakespeare. Actually, we're going to start with Shakespeare and then move on into other authors who have taken up the challenge of working within the restrictions of this rigid poetic form. Sonnets have long been considered the ideal form by which to express love. You remember it all started with that Italian Petrarch writing sonnets to Laura. The idea that sonnets are love poems traveled to England along with the particular rhyme scheme, the iambic pentameter, and the 14 lines. So what is the greatest love story in all of English literature? Romeo and Juliet, right? The first sonnet I want to talk about is not even a sonnet per se. It's 14 lines from Shakespeare's play Romeo and Juliet. The first 14 lines of dialogue between the two star-crossed lovers when they first meet. They are at a party, and in the middle of a dance they end up holding hands. The first words they speak to each other are in iambic pentameter, and they have a rhyme scheme. You guessed it, A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. It's a sonnet. The sonnet form is the ideal vessel by which to communicate love, and Romeo and Juliet are the poster children for romantic love. How fitting is it that their first words are in sonnet form? Let's look at these 14 lines found in Act 1, Scene 5.
If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle fine is this: my lips, two blushing pilgrims, ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss. Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much, which mannerly devotion shows in this. For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss. Have not saints lips, and holy palmers too? I, pilgrim, lips that they must use in prayer. Oh, then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do. They pray, grant thou, lest faith turn to despair. Saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake. Then move not, while my prayer's effect I take.
Romeo has just taken Juliet's hand into his, and Romeo's first words to Juliet are the first quatrains of the sonnet. If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle sin is this: my two lips, two blushing pilgrims, ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss. Back in Shakespeare's day, and indeed still today in some forms of Christianity, there was a clear separation between the things of God, the sacred, and the ordinary things, the profane. Romeo has just taken Juliet's hand into his, and he declares hers to be a holy shrine, worthy of his veneration, and his hand profane, unworthy, and rough. Like a travel-stained pilgrim visiting a shrine on the way to the Holy Land, Romeo is implying that his inferior lips would gently desecrate her holiness by visiting upon her sacred hand a tender kiss. He's basically saying, I think you are so awesome. Juliet speaks in the next quatrain, Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much, which mannerly devotion shows in this. For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss. She picks up his metaphor, calling Romeo a good pilgrim. She says that his hands are fine, in that they, like pilgrims, aren't simply profane because of their mannerly devotion. And besides, pilgrims touch the hands of saints. I think Juliet is thinking about statues that represent saints that pilgrims kiss the hands of. Because pilgrims used to carry palm branches on their return trip from the Holy Land, pilgrims were often called palmers. They greeted each other with a holy kiss. A friend of mine who has lived in the Middle East once told me that a holy kiss looked like this, palm to palm. And then you'd kiss it and send it to the other palmer in greeting. In all this, Juliet basically says that saints and pilgrims touch hands, so I don't mind if you touch mine. Romeo then says, Have not saints lips and holy palmers too? Well, if you're okay with the hand-holding thing, let's move things along to some lips-to-lips action. To which Juliet replies, I pilgrim lips that they must use in prayer, which means, slow down, buddy. Saints don't use their lips that way. And then Romeo says, O then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do. They pray, grant thou, lest faith turn to despair. By which he means, I'm okay with praying. Praying hands go like this. Let's have our lips pray this way too, or I will lose my faith. Juliet says, saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake. Saints being statues don't move, but they can grant some action that are grounded in prayer. Basically, she says, I'm not moving. You come my way. Romeo then says, then move not while my prayer's effect I take. You don't need to move. I will do what I've been praying that I could do. And then they kiss. So these most famous of lovers first meet with alternating lines of a Shakespearean sonnet on their lips, just before they end up on each other's lips. Without compromising rhyme or rhythm or meter, Shakespeare manages complex metaphors and clever flirting. It's genius. Our next sonnet is called On His Blindness. It was written by John Milton. John Milton is considered to be the greatest poet of his time. I think an argument can be easily made that he is in the top 3 of the most influential writers in the English language. Shakespeare and Chaucer are the other 2. But he did not write his most famous work, Paradise Lost, until after he had become blind in both eyes. He wrote this sonnet between 1662 and 1665. In it he wrestles with his loss of sight.
When I consider how my light is spent half my days in this dark world and wide, and that one talent which is death to hide, lodged with me useless, though my soul more bent to serve there with my Maker, and present my true account, lest he returning chide. Doth God exact day labour, light and night? I fondly ask. But patience to prevent that murmur soon replies, God doth not need either man's work or his own gifts. Who best bear his mild yoke, they serve him best. His state is kingly. Thousands at his bidding speed and post over land and ocean without rest. They also serve who only stand and wait.
You can see from the rhyme scheme that this sonnet is Petrarchan. If you don't remember what that is, you can review it in my introductory video called What is a Sonnet? In the first lines, when I consider how my light is spent ere half my days in this dark world and wide, Milton considers how he has spent his light thus far, before half his life is over. He was around 40 when he went blind. Metonymy is a literary device where something closely associated with a thing stands in for the thing itself. The term light is metonymy. He's not talking about spending light, but something closely associated with light, and this of course means sight, among other things. Without light, the world is indeed dark. And in the absence of sight, the wideness of the world increases, for no limits can be seen. It's kind of overwhelming. And that one talent which is death to hide, lodged with me useless, though my soul more bent to serve there with my Maker and present my true account, lest he returning chide. These lines allude to the parable of the talents found in Matthew 25. That's the one where the master takes off on a journey and he leaves 3 servants with some money. 5 talents, 2 talents, and 1 talent. A talent is a significant amount. The servants were supposed to do something with the talents, and when the master returned, he called them to account. The one with 5 talents had doubled it and gave the master 10. The second servant also doubled his 2 talents, and the third had buried his talent and returned the 1 talent back to his master. The master replied, "You wicked, lazy servant," and he threw him out into the darkness where there was weeping and gnashing of teeth. Not good. So Milton, unable to use his God-given talent, which is lodged within him useless, identifies himself with that third servant, with perhaps one difference, that he wants to use the talent to serve his Maker. He does not want to be chided, as was the third servant. But he's about to ask a foolish question. Doth God exact day labor, light denied? I fondly ask. Fondly means foolish. The question is, does God expect me to use a talent requiring sight without sight? Personified patience promptly stops him before he can make a fool of himself, and he tells him, God doth not need either man's work or his own gifts. Who best bear his mild yoke, they serve him best. God isn't reliant on us. He doesn't need anything. The gifts that we have, they are from him in the first place. Those who serve God the best are the ones who accept life as it comes and submit to God's control over their lives. And he won't ask too much, says Patience. His state is kingly. That's important. Thousands at his bidding speed and post o'er land and ocean without rest. They also serve who only stand and wait. I think that Patience is here differentiating between lords and kings. Lords don't have unlimited resources, and they are a little more insistent that every servant on his estate be productive. A king has so many who can do his bidding. He can afford to allow the occasional servant to only stand and wait. Interestingly, Milton eventually went on to write Paradise Lost. Blindness didn't force Milton to the sidelines. Our next poem comes from Percy Bysshe Shelly. Ozymandias was published in 1818. Ozymandias is the Greek name for the Egyptian pharaoh Ramses II. Here's the sonnet.
I met a traveller from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings, look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away.
If you count generously, and I choose to do so, this poem has 4 speakers. The first is the I in the first line. He meets a traveler from an antique land. That word antique jumps out at you, does it not? The word ancient would have been the more obvious choice, maybe, but Shelley goes with antique. Both words mean old, but in both denotation and sound, antique suggests a fragility and a preciousness that ancient does not. This traveler, the second speaker, tells the first speaker of 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone that stand in the desert. These are the legs of a colossal statue that is all fallen down, the head laying nearby. The face, half sunk in the sand, still shows the passions the sculptor read in his subject, the great pharaoh, and he reports them to us. I make the sculptor the third speaker. The sestet turns toward our final speaker, Ozymandias himself, who speaks to us through the millennia, and his words are on the pedestal. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. The final words sort of express an ironic silence. Nothing beside remains round the decay of that colossal wreck. Boundless and bare, the lone and level land stretch far away. This busted-up statue is in pieces in the middle of nowhere. The desolation of the place is reinforced with the alliteration of the last 2 lines. Although his rule was long and his empire was great, we barely remember the guy. The art that remains, the stuff he commissioned, is pretty grand. It's all that's left of him, actually. But the last thing it leads to is despair, even in the lowly travelers. This is an ironic poem. The words of Ozymandias in the current context are kind of pathetic, as great as he was to begin with. Like Percy Bysshe Shelley, William Wordsworth is another poet from what we call the Romantic era. One of the key characteristics of this era was the rejection of the rationalistic and mechanistic view of the world. The Romantics celebrated nature and imagination. Wordsworth articulates these romantic ideals in his poem The World is Too Much With Us, which was published in 1807.
The world is too much with us. Late and soon, getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. Little we see in nature that is ours. We have given our hearts away, a sordid boon. This sea that bears her bosom to the moon, the winds that will be howling at all hours, and are upgathered now, like sleeping flowers. For this, for everything, we are out of tune. It moves us not. Great God, I'd rather be a pagan, suckled in a creed outworn. So might I, standing on this pleasant lea, have glimpses that would make me less forlorn, have sight of Proteus rising from the sea, or hear old Triton blow his wreathed horn.
The rhythm of the first two lines reinforces Wordsworth's view of the world dominated by science and industry. Let's scan the first line. The world is too much with us late and soon. The first line doesn't have the iambic pentameter that we usually find in sonnets. Well, it does, but it's all messed up by the two accented syllables next to each other, too much. And that's what he's saying. It's all too much these days. The second line, getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. This line isn't iambic either, it's dactylic. The labels don't matter, the effect does. What does it sound like? Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It's sing-song and it's silly. It's like a mouse chasing his tail. Getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. That's us living in the modern world. We spin around in circles, getting and spending, and we are little wheels in a gigantic economic machine. Our powers, all the wonderful things that human beings are capable of, are unused because we are too busy greedily clamoring after more and more stuff. Little we see in nature that is ours. There was a time when human beings could see all kinds of things in nature with which we could identify. This is no longer the case. Modern life has divorced us from the natural world. We have given our hearts away. We've sold out. Yes, we've gained some things. That's what the word boon means. But we have lost so much more. The boon is sordid. Sordid means foul or sleazy or vile. In the next three lines, he speaks of nature. The rhythm settles down and flows along beautifully. The sea that bears her bosom to the moon, the winds will be howling at all hours and are upgathered now like sleeping flowers. The representatives of the natural world, the sea, the wind, and the flowers, are personified, emphasizing the connections with nature that we no longer see. The beautiful intimacy between the sea and the moon, the wildness of the wind, and the drowsiness of the flowers. For this, for everything, we are out of tune. It moves us not. Okay, here's the part I really love about this sonnet. This is a Petrarchan sonnet. It has a chunk of 8 lines that are all about how we have no relationship with nature and that we are only concerned about getting and spending. And because it's Petrarchan, we ought to expect something new in the 6 lines that remain, with a turn at the first words of line 9, the volta, remember? This doesn't happen. He just carries on with it moves us not. But then, mid-line, he erupts with frustration. It's sort of a delayed volta. Great God, I'd rather be a pagan suckled in a creed outworn. Part expletive, part prayer, the speaker asserts that it is in some ways better to be a pagan who doesn't have any eternal salvation than it is to be a Christian living in the modern world, blind to the wonder of nature. The rest of the poem explains why this is so. So might I, standing on this pleasant lea, have glimpses that would make me less forlorn, have sight of Proteus rising from the sea, or hear old Triton blow his wreathed horn. A pagan wouldn't be forlorn like I am, because he would be able to stand on this meadow and see all kinds of things that would bring him joy. Things to which Wordsworth's contemporaries are blind and deaf. Examples, Proteus rising from the sea and the sound of Triton's horn. The Greeks, Wordsworth argues, lived in an enchanted world. They saw and heard the gods all over the place. We don't see anything, and that's tragic. Check out the sound of that last line. You can hear the horn blowing in the assonance. Our next and last sonnet is Elizabeth Barret Browning's How Do I Love Thee, Let Me Count the Ways. It was published around 1850, and I must admit that when I was an ignorant youth, I thought this was just a bunch of sappy sentimentality, but then I actually read it and discovered that it's really good. How Do I Love Thee by Elizabeth Barret Browning. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach, when feeling out of sight for the ends of being and ideal grace. I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need by sun and candlelight. I love thee freely as men strive for right. I love thee purely as they turn from praise. I love thee with the passion put to use in my old griefs and with my childhood's faith. I love thee with a love I seem to lose with my lost saints. I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life, and if God choose, I shall love thee better after death. So it's obviously a love poem. I like to think that she wrote it to her famous poet husband, Robert. She tells us her purpose in the first line. She will enumerate all the ways she loves him. This is kind of funny because it's just the sort of thing a Victorian would do, make categories and lists. She starts with something like a spatial explanation, and she covers a lot of space. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach when feeling out of sight for the ends of being and ideal grace. Depth and breadth and height are all three dimensions. Okay, but how far do we go in the three dimensions? To the extent that her soul can reach, under some very specific circumstances, when feeling out of sight for the ends of being and ideal grace. Well, I don't know if we can possibly comprehend those distances. They are too much for our minds. And this is the point. She starts out with the measurable and then moves off into spiritual dimensions, the extent that souls reach. That's big love, but she also loves him in the midst of mundane and ordinary life. I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need by sun and candlelight. This way of love doesn't need a whole quatrain to describe it. 2 lines will do. By sun and candlelight, that's morning and evening, work and rest, eating and sleeping. Then we have, I love thee freely as men strive for right. I love thee purely as they turn from praise. These lines are packed with parallels, the ideals of freedom and purity, that which men strive for and that from which they turn. These things flow much deeper than mere duty. Good men don't strive for right or turn from praise because they have to. She continues to count off the reasons as if on her fingers. In the sestet, she shifts from present to things of the past. I love thee with the passions put to use in my old griefs and with my childhood's faith. From ideal and abstract, she turns to the personal. In these lines, she is comparing her love to the passionate strength or steadfastness of other emotions, to those passions put to use in her old griefs, and to the steadfastness of her childhood faith. The diction turns her discussion toward religious love. I love thee with a love I seem to lose with my lost saints. She has lost people whom she loved, but she didn't actually lose the love along with the saints. These loves have been transferred to her husband. Then she concludes her sonnet. I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life, and if God choose, I shall love thee better after death. I love you now, I love you forever, I love you with every breath, through good times and bad times, that's the tears and the smiles, and on into eternity. The brilliance of this sonnet is that it explores the extent of love in so many different ways, but it's done in only 14 lines. And she was forced by the Italian sonnet form to have an iambic pentameter rhythm and a rhyme scheme, which, by the way, was A, B, B, A, A, B, B, A, C, D, C, D, C, D. And all this is really hard to do, but when you get it right, the effect is wonderful. I will be making one more video with another set of my favorite sonnets, so please subscribe so that you don't miss it. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.